Hiring for your small business? If you're not looking for professionals on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. That's like looking for your car keys in a fish tank. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't even visit other leading job sites. So start looking in the right place. With LinkedIn, you can hire professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Millions of people have lost weight with personalized plans from Noom. Like Evan, who can't stand salads and still lost 50 pounds.
Salads generally for most people are the easy button, right? For me, that wasn't an option. I never really was a salad guy. That's just not who I am. But Noom worked for me.
Get your personalized plan today at Noom.com. Real Noom user compensated to provide their story. In 4 weeks, the typical Noom user can expect to lose 1 to 2 pounds per week. Individual results may vary.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeah.
What you're hearing are the sounds of people everywhere putting on Bombas socks, underwear, and T-shirts made from absurdly soft materials that feel like plush clouds. Yeah, that plush. And the best part? For every item you purchase, Bombas donates another to someone facing homelessness.
Bombas. Big comfort for everyone. Go to bombas.com/ACAST and use code ACAST for 20% off your first purchase. That's bombas.com/ACAST. Code ACAST.
Hello and welcome to the Napoleon Assist. We're going to do something a little bit different for the next instalment of Napoleon Month. I am joined by 4 fellow Napoleonic experts. I have Jimmy Chen. Hello, Jimmy. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm doing very well, thank you.
Jimmy, some of you will know, particularly if you're on Twitter, runs Napoleonic Impressions. And I hear a rumor that he quite likes Russia when it comes to this period. No idea where that comes from. I'm also joined by Geraint Thatcher. Right, Geraint?
Hello, nice to meet you.
Geraint is a Napoleonic buff hailing from Chester and is the person who keeps campaigning for me to do the War of 1812 on the Napoleon Assist. I haven't obliged him yet, but I keep promising him that I will get there, and I will get there, even if it ends up being the very last episode that I ever do, but it will happen. We also have Rachel Stark, who is a hobbyist of the Napoleonic era, who fell in love with the period through Sharp. Hey, Rachel, how are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
And finally, but by no means least, we have Josh Provan, who stars and runs, really, adventures in Historyland, and has written a couple of books, including Wild East, Britain in Japan, 1854 to 1868, and has another book forthcoming, Bullocks, Grain, and Good Madeira, which is on the Maratha and Jat campaigns of 1803 to 1806. Josh, how are you doing?
Doing very well.
Let's start, first of all, with your stances on Napoleon, because it's Napoleon month. It would be good to get your take on the guy. Rachel, ladies first. Napoleon, what's he like for you?
It's complicated. I find Napoleon very, very interesting. I find his life very fascinating. I don't think he was the Antichrist. I don't think he was a good guy. I think he was a complex person who had prodigious talents in some areas, total lack of talents in other areas. He was a very great military leader, not a great diplomat, who made some good decisions and quite a lot of really bad, really unforgivable decisions. So I find him very, very interesting, but I don't think you can make him a good guy.
That sounds remarkably nuanced and not like the Cult Napoleon at all. So the Cult Napoleon is going to be seething with that response, but I'm happy with it. Josh, give me your take.
My take on Napoleon. I am an admirer up until Egypt, and then I slowly slide down the hill of being unable to stand the man until he goes to Saint Helena, where I begin to see his humanity again. I wholeheartedly admit and acknowledge his talents, but much like Rachel, I can't quite see him as the stainless hero that some people see him as.
Fair enough. This is probably going to be a little bit of a running theme. Jimmy, what's your take?
Well, great military commander most of the time,
changed the world in many respects, but he wasn't able to adapt to changing circumstances as much as some of his contemporaries.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, that's brilliant. I haven't got any issues with that whatsoever. And Geraint, are you going to suddenly wave the flag for Cult Napoleon?
No, I agree with Rachel. He's a complex and interesting man, but at the end of the day, he was a warlord, and he did love war. I mean, he fought, was it 63 battles altogether in his career? You don't fight that many if you're not a bit in love with war. And there were, he did something. I mean, there's some things that he's known for that are good, but there's many things also that he did were bad. Yeah, I wouldn't say he was a good man at all. He probably wouldn't even refer to himself as a good man. It was, for him, it was, it was kill or be killed. I mean, in terms of up there with all the other rulers. And I'm sure that's how he looked at it himself, very cynically.
See, some would say that this is just Brits together in a room being Brits and therefore being anti-Napoleon, but
No. I mean, it doesn't make our side great. I mean, I've heard a lot about, and of course there was a lot of atrocities in Spain and other places, but Britain was just as bad. You read about what the British did in to suppress the rebellion in Ireland, murders, rapes. It was horrific stuff. So no, I mean, and obviously the Russians, they had serfdom, which is terrible. What they did Prussia and Austria all did in Poland was terrible. What Prussia did after Waterloo in France was pretty awful. It's hard to, it's a bit mealy-mouthed, but it's true. There's no real good guys here, but it's, unfortunately, that's the nature in war. The poor sods are in the middle, getting plundered by armies and just praying to God that they're not shot.
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
the reality is as well, no empire was a good empire. British, Spanish, French, German, there wasn't such a thing as a good empire.
Yeah, no, there wasn't. No, I agree.
The way this is going to work, each of my guests is going to have somewhere in the region of 5 minutes to pitch what they consider to be one of Napoleon's greatest battles. And at the end of that, we'll have a general discussion where we kind of discuss between ourselves what firstly constitutes a great battle, but also have a little bit of a think about some of the failings of each other's chosen engagements in a nice kind of way, not in a kind of cult Napoleon versus cults anti-Napoleon kind of way, which just involves hurling, in effect, excrement at each other. So who we go to first? Jimmy, start us off.
All right. So I have chosen to talk about the Battle of Marengo as what I consider to be one of Napoleon's great battles. Now, it's not a particularly great demonstration of Napoleon's abilities on the battlefield, but it is of great political and military significance, and arguably sets the scene for much of what we call the Napoleonic era or the Napoleonic Wars. And I'm making this argument because, well, let's have a sort of 2-minute brief summary of the Battle of Marengo, which is going to be some task. But essentially, in 1800, Napoleon is now first consul of the French Republic, and his grasp on political power is still somewhat loose. He's not really consolidated as much as he would have liked, and one of the reasons for this is because of the military situation in Europe generally, but also in Italy, where the Austrians have re-established their position in northern Italy, thanks much to the Russians under Suvorov and his blistering campaign in 1799. And because Napoleon had conquered Italy the first time, he considered it really his backyard, and he wanted to do it again. And to do so would increase his reputation at home and abroad and essentially consolidate his political position. So he went and marched over the Alps, as depicted famously, although erroneously, by David. And by June, he was in northern Italy, and he basically ran rings around the Austrian commander, General Michael von Melas. And von Melas basically thought that he was about to be surrounded and decided to surprise Napoleon, to give battle outside the city of Alessandria, the fortress of Alessandria. And essentially, even though Napoleon was under the impression that von Melas was planning to escape, Melas was actually going on the offensive and completely surprised Napoleon. And the top of the French line, the head of the French line on the 14th of June was at a small village 3 kilometers to the east called Marengo, and that's where the first shots of the battle were fired. You had an Austrian column led by Melas, essentially trying to break through, and a second column under General Peter Ott, which was trying to outflank get over the northern flank of the French position. And essentially fighting carried on very intensely for a couple of hours. Napoleon tried to get as many men onto the front as possible, but eventually Austrian numbers prevailed and the French were forced to fall back. Whereupon comes Napoleon's knight in shining armor, General Desaix, who had only arrived in Italy a few days earlier, and he had been sent off on an errand to try to sort of cut off a possible path of retreat for Melas. But it turned out that with the Battle of Marengo happening where it happened, that he was very much needed on the scene, and he arrived at around half 4 when the French were already falling back. And when he got back, Napoleon asked him for an assessment of the situation, and he said, "Sire, we've already lost this battle, but there's still time to win another." And essentially, a quick plan was cobbled together. Desaix sent forward some light infantry to basically blunt the Austrian pursuers, and a well-timed cavalry charge from General Kellerman routed the Austrian lines and forced them to go back all the way to Alessandria, where Melas had already retired, writing his battle report, thinking that he had won. So Marengo was, if we're talking about the battle itself, its real heroes were Desaix and Kellerman, and also Marmont, who commanded the artillery battery, which was firing canister at the advancing Austrian infantry. But Marengo was very important to Napoleon, because had he lost the battle, obviously his reputation as a great military commander, unparalleled successes despite Egypt, which he managed to massage, that would have been very difficult for him to sustain, and that would have weakened his political position in France. And indeed, soon after the Battle of Marengo, maybe just about a week after, Napoleon had to leg it back to Paris to attend to political matters in the capital. So that's why I think without Marengo, Napoleon would have been defeated. His army may have just entirely disintegrated. Northern Italy would still be under Austrian control, and even though it's still, even with Marengo, it's still several months, half a year until the Battle of Hohenlinden, when the second coalition actually came to an end and peace was made with the Austrians. But had Napoleon been defeated earlier, then I think we wouldn't see we wouldn't see the Napoleonic Code, we wouldn't see Austerlitz, we wouldn't see much of what we know as the Napoleonic Wars.
Fair enough. Thanks for that, Jimmy. The first question that occurs to me is this Napoleon planning things really well, in the sense that he's got lots of isolated, well, not isolated, but he's got lots of corps sort of in connection with one another, able to concentrate at the relevant moment to make something like Marengo happen? Or is this him just getting a bit lucky in terms of the fact that Desailly arrives at the right place at the right time because he's messed up and has misread the situation and, as you say, was losing the battle until the reinforcements arrived?
What I would say is that, yeah, certainly the battle is no demonstration of Napoleon's genius, but the operations beforehand, you could say, were rather successful, and they sort of pressured what Napoleon would later do as emperor, with much larger number of men under his command, but the idea of corps and mutually supporting units was certainly something we saw before Marengo. But as I said, Napoleon was surprised at Marengo, which is why he couldn't actually concentrate all of his men. He had about 50,000 men in his army of reserve. At Marengo, he could only, well, before Desailly turned up, he could only really count on about 20,000. And it was, as you say, it was only Desailly's intervention, again, completely fortuitous for him to have arrived in the right place at the right time, that they were able to turn this defeat into a victory.
Jimmy, thanks very much for that. I thought you put together a really nice case there. Let's move on to Rachel now. Rachel, what are you championing for Napoleon's greatest battle?
I'm going a bit cliche and I'm choosing Austerlitz.
Good choice though.
I'll put my hands up and firstly say I don't have any pretense of being a battlefield expert or any sort of expertise in that area at all. I'm genuinely more kind of drawn to the cultural elements of the time and the kind of characters, as it were. But I do think this battle shows why people call Napoleon a military genius. I think it shows him at the height of his powers. Obviously, a decade later, he goes from pinnacle to depth, but it really shows him at his best. And I've chosen Austerlitz for a couple of reasons. Firstly, the numbers themselves obviously are quite impressive. There's a little bit of variation in the numbers that people think were there, but at the very least, Napoleon was outnumbered by 10,000 troops, possibly as much as 20,000. When you look at the numbers of the casualties, killed, wounded, and captured, the Allies lose, between killed, wounded, and captured, something like 38% of their forces. With Napoleon, it works out 13%. So just running the numbers alone, I think it's a fairly impressive battle. But I think it shows Napoleon at his most crafty, it shows him at his most tactical, and it shows that he has a real understanding, not just of the nature of battle, but the psychological elements as well. He knew he needed a battle to capitalise on his success at Ulm. He knew that Kutuzov was going to slip away, and he needed battle, but he wanted it on his terms. Being Napoleon, he liked everything on his terms. And he needed to draw his enemy out. He knew he had a limited time frame to do it, and he baits this huge psychological trap. He abandons the Pratzen heights. He deliberately weakens his right flank. He sends General Savary to say that the emperor expresses a desire to avoid battle. He's interested in peace, to convey this idea that he's actually quite worried that his force isn't going to be strong enough. I mean, it's the equivalent of sticking a big metaphorical bit of cheese on the Pratzen heights and the enemy walks into the trap. And it also, I think, one of the things Napoleon does well, and as much as that he's a micromanager to the nth degree, he chooses his subordinates well. And he knows that he's got Marshal Davout within the right distance away. It's a forced march, but he can get there in time. And I think his men march something like 6 to 8 miles in 48 hours, or is it kilometers, one of the two. But it's an impressive distance either way. He knows he's got people he can call on. He knows he's got his forces in reserve. He appreciates the topography. I mean, even Napoleon doesn't control the weather, but it works out to his advantage on the day. And as the enemy falls on his weakened flank, they're weakening their centre, and that's when he says to Marshal Soult, how quickly can you get up to the Pratzen Heights? 20 minutes, sire, and he gives that order to attack in 15. He smashes their centre, and he's baited this trap so incredibly well, and they've walked right into it. I think, in fairness, and Jimmy would know more about this than I, Kutuzov would have had more sense. But he's overruled by Alexander. And there's a quote that I feel kind of sums them up quite well. Napoleon's a military man who fancies himself an emperor. Alexander's an emperor who fancies himself a military man. And he kind of overrules Kutuzov, and it's not a good situation at all. But the impact of the battle's enormous as well. You've got that quote that Pitt says, roll up the map of Europe, it will not be wanted these 10 years. It effectively ends the Holy Roman Empire, which has existed for a millennium. And there's temporary peace at Europe. It forces, Austria and Russia to come to the negotiating table. And I think there's a fairly strongish argument that Napoleon considers itself one of his best battles as well, because he gives out no victory title. And one of the kind of real dichotomies of Napoleon's character that interests me is that he's a very generous rewarder of his subordinates when he feels it's justified, and nobody benefits more than the marshals. So we see, Augereau's Duke of Castiglione, and, Davout becomes Duke of Austerlitz, and Messina becomes Duke of Rivoli, and so on and so on. Soult was pretty clear that he thought he deserved the title Duke of Austerlitz, which he arguably did because it would be one of his finest hours. But when Napoleon thinks it's his limelight, he doesn't share it. And he thinks it's his triumph, one of his finest hours, and there's no Duke of Austerlitz. He keeps the title to himself. So I think it's a fairly convincing argument that Napoleon feels it's one of his finest battles, because when he feels the limelight's his, he doesn't share titles. It's the glory belongs to him. So that's why I think Austerlitz is a strong contender for Napoleon's best battle.
It's a real contender. I mean, the others on the call, people listening via the podcast won't be able to see this, but we're all kind of nodding sagely along as you're saying this. And I love that metaphor that you put there, that he's kind of hung that piece of cheese out there on the Pratzen Heights, and they take the bait. It's very difficult to come up with any counterpoints without sounding churlish, because this is such a strong contender, and it shows such imagination. I guess the issue I have is the aftermath. As the Russians are running away, the artillery being turned on the lake, and the firing on the lake, and the men falling through the ice. Does that just take some of the shine off of it, in terms of it wasn't an honourable thing to do? Strategically, yes, I completely understand why you would do that. From a perspective of, let's really stick the knife into this retreating force, of course you would. But in terms of the honours that are meant to be associated with wars in this time, even though, okay, that's all changing by this era, it doesn't quite feel right somehow to me.
It's brutal. But interestingly, while I was compiling all my wee notes today, I read an article that suggested that Napoleon exaggerated that for effect, and actually far fewer men drowned when they dredged the lakes, that there were far fewer bodies than Napoleon gave way to believe, and this was him effectively enhancing his bogeyman of Europe reputation and kind of trying to cow people. So there is possibility of that, but if it is true that the artillery was turned on fleeing soldiers and people drowned like that, I think it is brutal, and it doesn't really reflect well on the French soldiers at all.
Brilliant, thank you very much. We will keep it rolling. Geraint, take it away.
Well, I'm going to go with the Berezina, although after listening to Rachel, I'd probably say Rachel's is probably the best. But yeah, I'm going to go with the Berezina just simply because a lot of it was unintended. He had his back to the wall. There was nothing planned. He just had to do it like that with a flick of the fingers. He was, just for other people then that don't know or listen to the podcast, he was retreating from Moscow. The army had pretty much broken down by that point. There was literally thousands of stragglers, and he was coming to the Berezina River to cross. The French engineer general, I'm forgetting the guy's name now, had actually disobeyed his orders and had actually burned the bridges and destroyed the stores there that Napoleon was hoping for. He also, on top of that, had 3 Russian armies, one from the south, one from the north, and one from the west, all heading towards him. So on top of being trapped by a river with an army that's literally breaking down, or has broken down, with no supplies, he's got not one but 3 armies coming for him. And yeah, as far as I'm concerned, this was Napoleon at his very best on a tactical level. He manages to use Victor's Corps, which is fairly unengaged, or still fairly together, shall we say, to feint with the Russians. He actually gets his engineers to literally build bridges in the middle of freezing water of -29 or whatever the temperature was at the time. I mean, those engineers, they must have realized that they were going to their deaths building that bridge, and they did, but they did the job. And he's just having to fend off and feint and hold off 3 different armies, get a bridge built, get his army over that, and get his army over that bridge. And he does that. I don't think anyone else at the time probably could have done that. I mean, there was a similar retreat for Wellington in 1812 from Burgos, and survivors of the Corona campaign were saying the Burgos retreat was actually worse. So it took Napoleon to have done that. I don't think any other general would have been able to have done that at the time, and that's why I would rate him for that battle as his best battle, just simply because he wasn't prepared for it. It was something completely thrown at him, unexpected, and yet he managed to save his army, or the remnants of it anyway. A load of stragglers refused to go, and then unfortunately the Russians, or the Cossacks, caught up with them. They stampeded the bridge, which collapsed the bridge, and a lot of the survivors on the far bank were killed. But from Napoleon's point of view, he got his combat army over that river.
Thanks very much. One thing that strikes me, I mean, the troops, they've got their back to the wall here, almost literally, in the fact that they've got a river behind them. Is there an argument to be made that what matters in a time like that is survival instinct? And so in some sense, Napoleon kind of knew that he could ask far above and beyond what was required, because when you've got no other way out, men anybody will go that bit further in terms of fighting. I mean, I'm struck with sort of parallels with what happened at Corunna under Moore in early 1809.
That's a good response. All I would say is, though, that I think they've gone beyond that. I mean, literally, I think the number's about 40,000 stragglers had given up. They refused to move. They'd had enough. They would rather, if they just decided to sit there and wait for death or whatever, or imprisonment, rather than move. So his general had already disobeyed his orders and destroyed those bridges and those supplies. So from his perspective, I think the survival instincts, they'd already gone past that by that point. Which is incredible, but is true. Sometimes people just give up, and that's what most of that French army had done, yet he still managed to get them across the river.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Absolutely. Josh, last but by no means least, take it away.
I'm championing the Battle of Rivoli in 1797. So let us first speak of numbers. You're dealing here with the French army, the Armée d'Italie, of 24,000 men. And on the day of the battle, the Austrians were fielding somewhere around 28,000. So a decent proportion more than the French. The goal of the Austrians in this campaign is to relieve the siege of Mantua and restore Austrian possessions in northern Italy. And obviously, the French are trying to stop them doing that. The general situation is that there have been 3 attempts already to relieve Mantua, and they had all failed. Austrian morale was pretty low, and time was running out to relieve the city. By January of 1797, Austrian commander Freiherr Josef Alfinzi had gathered together a strong force out of reinforcements and what was left of the rather battered units that had been knocked around by Napoleon previously that year into about, he formed them into about 5 columns representing roughly 3 general thrusts to break through the French army. The problem that had plagued the Austrian relief attempts up till this point was the mobile and audacious nature of the French defense of the River Adige and the mountain and the mountain passes to the south. Napoleon had stayed mobile and relatively separated, but his fast-moving divisions could always concentrate with miraculous speed to any given point, as if commanded by some sort of wizardry, as far as the Austrians were concerned. This had been their undoing. Napoleon, of course, was feeling the strain as well. He'd only been able to. By this point, he was only able to dispose of about 45,000 men across the entire area of operations. This is opposed to the Austrian strength of around 48,000 to 50,000 in the general area. Obviously, in Mantua, trying to break through to Mantua, defending the passes to Mantua, and etc. This, of course, again, paradoxically, was also still bad for the Austrians because they had been fought to a bruising standstill, and they had each time they had tried to get through to the wide plains that surrounded the city to exploit their better numbers, they had just been stopped. And strategically speaking, this is one of Napoleon's finest hours. This is what signals him as the new shining star of European warfare, this first Italian campaign leading up to the Battle of Rivoli. And so this was the Austrians' 4th and probably, they all knew, last attempt to break through, and they were going to just throw as many men at the Adige and the mountains as was possible and find a way through. That was pretty much it. And why this battle is Napoleon's greatest is pretty much that because all of Napoleon's battles, as we've actually heard today, are fought on a tightrope. All his greatest battles are fought on a tightrope. He gambled time and time again on maximum damage for maximum success. Every time he fought one of these battles, he was risking utter annihilation, basically, and he knew that very well. But he counted on a superior genius, what he believed was his superior genius, and of his subordinates and his men, to be able to instinctively make the right decisions, even if he was theoretically lost by all previous standards of warfare. Rivoli was the first of these photo-finish victories, I feel, and it was a spectacular one, because the multi-pronged Austrian attack at first perplexed Napoleon, but he waited at least 2 days to see which of the thrusts was actually the one that he needed to deal with. And when that happened, it was signaled by the fact that he originally was actually going to attack a different Austrian force, but then I believe it was General Joubert at Rivoli, the pass of Rivoli on the Adige, who got forced back, and he got reports of this happening, and that was when he sent messages saying to General Massena to get your butt over to Rivoli as fast as possible. And he galloped there himself, and he stalled his retreating division, and with orders to concentrate already sent, he basically was instructed, you are basically to stand here and die to a man, but die to a man you will if you can hold this position. And so they slogged it out. This battlefield is very tricky. It's formed by it's very narrow. The access to it are very narrow. There's a plateau of Rivoli where the Austrians had to get onto to to form into line. And on one side you have the River Adige, and on the other side you have a tributary, and in the middle you have the plateau of Rivoli, overlooked by Monte Boldo or something like that. It's very mountainous and tricky. The Austrians actually were very close, because of this topography, to actually enveloping Napoleon completely, cutting him off from support and crushing him in this little pocket. And they had, I think his name was General Lusignan, marching to do that very thing. So Napoleon has to dig in and hold on, and he does that because Massena appears, and he's one of his golden boys. Massena, you can depend on Massena to do marvelous things, and that's what he does. He splits his division almost across the entire field, and he holds on against the Austrians. Now, with the center of the Austrians making progress and the flanks actually being held up by the rivers and Massena's, miraculous division, Napoleon builds up troops behind the main line under Joubert, which is pushed back. But when the Austrians deploy, coming out of this narrow valley, Napoleon unmasks 15 guns and pounds them. He punishes them for it. And then when the Austrians attack, he's able to counterattack with more reinforcements. Cavalry is now up. One of the most hilarious things about it is that General Lassalle is running around with like 25 men of the chasseurs or something like that, and he captures an entire battalion. One Austrian brigade of up to 4,000 men is reduced to 300 by the end of the day's fighting, by the end of this counterattack. The losses are incalculable compared by the scale of it. And this battle, the numbers are only like they're about a fraction. They're not huge, I guess, but I guess compared to Austerlitz, it's almost comparable, because by the end of the day, by end of 2 days of fighting, because the Austrians get thrown back with horrendous casualties, the next day, I think Joubert takes over and he crushes them again. At the end of the fighting, Michael Breuer's estimates that there are 11,000 Austrian prisoners, 3,000 killed and wounded. And over the next couple of days, the Austrian fighting force is reduced from around 28,000 to a broken rabble of 13,000. And it is the end. Mantua surrenders. Northern Italy, until, as Jimmy said, the Second Italian campaign, because of Suvorov's invasion, is in the hands of the Republic. And Napoleon I lose words. All of Europe lost words. This guy with a broken rabble of an army, of a bunch of Republican recruits and volunteers, and nobody's commanding them from rural places in France, had humbled the Austrians so badly that some brigades were reduced to 300 men. What? And this pattern of getting in there, dragging your opponent down the pit with you, and crushing him as you fall, and then chasing him out, is exactly what he did at Marengo, tried to do at Marengo, and got away with it by dint of his subordinates. What he did at Austerlitz with a more refined and a much more professional army, and what he then did at, what he tried to do at Waterloo, actually, I think. This is his pattern. That's what made him so dangerous to tangle with. And I think this model you see at Rivoli, where mutually supporting forces rush to one point, is exactly what he did for the rest of his career. And that's why I think Rivoli is arguably one of his most impressive, but quite often overlooked victories, just because Austerlitz and Friedland and things like that, who were fought against morons, I might add. This guy actually had a chance of winning and destroying Napoleon. That's why I think Rivoli is highly impressive and should be more praised as a feat of arms.
Josh, that was impassioned beyond words. Thank you very much for that. Again, it's difficult to be churlish because you made such a strong case. And inevitably, where I am kind of putting forward these devil's advocate questions, I'm going to sound churlish, but hey, that's what I'm here for. If you're gambling everything on a single pitched engagement, is that necessarily an indication of exceptional ability? And perhaps an indication more of recklessness? And I would never be one of these people who says that Napoleon kind of was lucky in the way in which he sustained his career, because there's too much consistency there for anybody to put that together. But if you are gambling everything every single time, is that not the case of just throwing everything and the kitchen sink at a battle, rather than thinking like other great military minds, which is, how do I also ensure that if everything were to go to pot, I have some way of salvaging this?
Good question. It's fair. I think it speaks to Napoleon's general career more than perhaps Rivoli itself. But Napoleon was a gambler. He said it himself. Is this general lucky? Luck is basically he said that luck is some percentage of success or whatever, one of his many maxims or something like that. That this plan was the one that he tended to go for, and became less and less successful as he came against stiffer opposition towards the end of the coalitions, perhaps doesn't speak so much to a weakness as perhaps that the talents that he did have, that we all have to acknowledge that he had, for pulling stuff out of the bag or having subordinates who can do it for him, and that is one of the great things of 18th and 19th century European military history, is that field battles are risky propositions anyway. It's highly unusual to have a general who actually wants to fight in the field and doesn't just want to fight sieges all the time. Marlborough was particularly strange for the fact he sought battles, because the destruction of your army is essentially the destruction of your war effort. And Napoleon cottoned on from Rivoli onwards, I think, to this idea: they don't want to fight me. So if I go and fight them, I have the advantage and I can force my own terms on them. And at Rivoli, unlike some of the other battles that have been mentioned, he was in control of it, basically. And I think so long as he was able to retain control, which is why Marengo was so dodgy, and obviously Waterloo, and when things started spiraling out of control, this is like, I'm sorry to bring up the Duke of Wellington here, but it's like what Wellington said about harnesses. Napoleon's strategy was a leather harness, but when it worked superbly. But what you actually want is a rope harness. So when something goes wrong, you tie a knot and you go on. This is Napoleon's leather harness.
Absolutely. I love that quote, and I think you put that very well. Let me throw it open to the others then. Sadly, Rachel has had to duck out, but she sends us all her best. She made a very strong case for Austerlitz. I'm reluctant to invite you all to stick the knife in her absence, but I'm going to encourage you to do that anyway. So counterpoints to Austerlitz as Napoleon's greatest battle.
Well, to echo what Josh has said, with the exception of Kutuzov on the Allied side, Austerlitz was fought against morons. You had Alexander, who, by virtue of being Tsar, was, essentially decided to stamp his authority as commander-in-chief. And he accepted the Austrian Chief of Staff's suggestion that basically you should not only sort of send the entire left flank against this seemingly weakened position of Telnitz and Soknitz, but also most of the center. And when you've got a massive army streaming along like that, they'll need to get the job done very quickly, otherwise they're going to get absolutely punished in the center, which is what Napoleon did. So I think it's just overconfidence from Alexander and from the Austrians, who I think, Kutuzov would have been happy to retreat, back to Moscow, but Weyrother, the Austrian chief of staff, and the Austrian command basically thought that, well, Vienna is under French occupation. We want to press on the issue. We want to sort of get this done as quickly as possible. We're outnumbering the man. And together with all the deceptions that Rachel talked about with the Allies being under the impression that Napoleon was perhaps not as strong as had his weaknesses, they just decided to go all in for it. And really, this is a case of the coalition going all in, but not having the abilities to pull it off, especially when you're against Davout.
Seeing as you were brave enough to go first, Jimmy, I'm now going to punish you for that bravery by encouraging the others to now stick the knife into your back. So Josh and Geraint, you make great points, I should say. No, you make powerful points there.
I agree with them pretty much. I'd have made the same.
Can't argue with that.
Josh, Geraint, when it comes to Marengo, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think Melis was a fairly capable commander. I mean, he performed well with Suvorov just only the year previously. So, there's a lot. It is war. I mean, you mentioned like he was facing some idiots. Like I was reading the campaigns in the American Civil War of Robert E. Lee and how he was fighting McClellan and he was launching after attacks against McClellan and he was losing, but McClellan just kept retreating. I mean, at the end of the day, you can only, they're not the only ones. You've got idiots all around. I think the only thing I disagree really is about Benison when you said he was a moron, because I mean, apart from three things, he'd actually up till that point he'd actually led a decent campaign. Just reading up on it, he'd even beaten Napoleon at a battle, not after Eylau's draw, but their names it now.
Augsburg.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, because Chandler said he was Murat there, but I've read books and it's like no, Napoleon was actually at the battle, and he was actually directing it.
Basically, my argument against Marengo being his one of his greatest victories, it's on the flags. It's true. He boasted about it. It's true, but it was not his battle to win. Despite what Rachel very, very interestingly said about Austerlitz not being a ducal title, Marengo should have been somebody's title, should have been Desaix's title, should have been Kellerman's.
He was dead.
Well, posthumously, give it to his family, for heaven's sake. The glory was out somewhere else. He had lost. He was sitting by the roadside in despair when Desaix showed up and won the second battle. So basically my argument that although the political ramifications of it were very great, and it was spun to be part of the Napoleonic legend, it is essentially a failed Rivoli, and it wasn't his talent that won it.
I didn't dispute that. My point was that it wasn't a very good battle, but
agree. Basically, I agree with you, but I think that kind of makes. I'm just sort of hammering that home slightly.
You're questioning my interpretation of the of the terms of engagement.
We're historians. We question everything. Let's turn the table on Josh now. Rivoli.
It's rather difficult because as Josh said, it's not a battle many people know much about, and therefore, much of what we know is what Josh told us 10 minutes ago, and therefore, what? So yeah, what I would say about something like Rivoli. Why did you pick Rivoli rather than some of the earlier battles in the in the first Italian campaign, because there was Lodi and Arcola, which
question. What? A counter question? You actually want a response? For heaven's sake. No, I picked Rivoli because it was the end of the campaign. That was what finished it.
Okay.
If the Austrians could have it all recovered, they would have again and tried probably again, because this was their fourth attempt. The other battles had not stopped them. You know, so that's why.
That makes sense.
Okay, and then lastly, but by no means least, Berezina. What are the counter arguments on Berezina?
I think you were very brave to choose Berezina as his greatest battle, and not Friedland or something, because if you can call it a battle, it's in a very modern sense, because it took a couple of days or over the course of several days. If it's a battle, he lost it. If it is the end of the campaign, obviously, then okay, he got some men away. But I'm going to return to the idea of facing morons. Now, I don't mean Kutuzov, and I don't particularly mean Wittgenstein, but I do mean the guy who was to his south.
Oh, Chichagov.
The guy, Chichagov.
The admiral.
Admiral Chichagov, who was meant to cut off the escape of the French army. Now, obviously, the Russians all blamed each other for doing this, and I'm sure Jimmy will bring up a point about why Kutuzov did not press the attack. But the only reason Napoleon got the heck over that river is because Chichagov did not do what many generals of brigade would know to do, which is search left and right up that river for other crossing points.
That's a fair point, but Napoleon would not have known that at the time.
That's not really my problem, though, is it?
Josh is just there to pose difficult questions. I'm conscious we are rapidly running out of time. Jimmy, I've got to give you the opportunity, though, to talk Russia.
Right, yes. Just a quick point about Kutuzov's motivations, because Kutuzov could have had the opportunity to destroy Napoleon's entire army on several occasions earlier, especially at the Battle of Krasny. And the reason that he didn't, and the reason why he actually essentially allowed Napoleon to escape at Krasny and at Berezina, is because he had a understanding of the geopolitical situation, and he understood that if Napoleon were out of the way, if Napoleonic France, if Napoleon was no longer there, then essentially the predominant power in Europe would be the power that that controlled the seas, i.e. Great Britain, and that Russia, while allied to Britain at the time, may not enjoy the fruits of that alliance for very long. And I think, given the fact that the Crimean War happened about 40 years later, and with the British and French now fighting on the same side, I think he had a point. The only thing is that obviously Alexander decided to continue the campaign into 1813 and 1814 to put an end to Napoleon. So Kutuzov was basically being insubordinate and effectively allowing at least Napoleon and the core of his army to escape.
So Napoleon was allowed to run away at Berezina. I'm afraid we're going to have to cut it short there. Gents, it's been fantastic having you on. Thank you also to Rachel. That was the first of 2 installments on Napoleon's greatest battle. I was joined by Josh Provan, Rachel Stark, Jimmy Chen and Geraint Thatcher, who championed Rivoli, Austerlitz, Marengo and Berezina respectively. All 4 of my guests are on Twitter. Josh can be found at Land of History, and his YouTube channel of the same name features a wealth of videos and interviews discussing a diverse range of military history topics, including the Napoleonic Wars, all of which I would highly recommend. Rachel can be found on Twitter at BookishRachel, and I'd thoroughly recommend following her for great threads and tweets on the Napoleonic Wars and for general good humour in her Twitter content. Jimmy can be found at JSC1812, and his website Napoleonic Impressions can be found at napoleonicimpressions.com. Definitely a site to check out if you're looking for stocking fillers for the Napoleonicist in your life. And finally, Geraint Thatcher is always posting thought-provoking questions via his account at ThatchGER1. The conversation continues online, and you can have your say on what was Napoleon's greatest battle. A Twitter vote is open for all of the battles featured in this episode, with the winner of both this heat and the one to follow next week going through to a two-way vote in the final week of November. You can have your say by searching for my Twitter account at ZWhiteHistory, and you can also join the discussion in the forum at thenapoleonicwars.net. Napoleon Month continues all November here on The Napoleonicist. On Sunday the 15th, I'll be bringing you the Napoleon the Great debate as Marcus Cribb and Luke Daly-Groves grapple with the conflicting interpretations on the Emperor's legacy. On the 18th, you can enjoy the second instalment of Napoleon's Greatest Battle, where another four will appropriately battle it out for your votes. On the 22nd, I'll be bringing you a superb interview with Professor Beatrice de Graaf on Napoleon diplomacy and state security, before wrapping up the month with two instalments of a new feature on Napoleon's marshals. I'll be joined once again by Josh Provan in a double feature on those marshals who served specifically in the Peninsular War, discussing their wider career, of course, which we have affectionately termed Boney's Boys in Spain. Those two episodes will air on the 25th and 29th of November, with more on those who served in other theatres due to follow in the new year. Until next time, though, I'm Zach White. This has been the first instalment of Napoleon's Greatest Battles, part of Napoleon Month on The Napoleonicist. Take care of yourselves, my friends. Stay well, stay safe, and as always, thank you for listening.
The secret to visibly firmer, summer-ready skin is here. Osea's #1 best-selling Undaria Algae Body Oil. Clinically proven to instantly improve skin elasticity and transform dull, dry skin to silky, soft, and unbelievably glowing. Rich yet never greasy, Undaria Algae Body Oil is formulated with sustainably sourced seaweed to help replenish the skin's moisture barrier, and 7 nourishing active botanical oils for results you can see and feel all over. The best part? Its signature scent. A blend of freshly squeezed grapefruit, cypress, and mango mandarin transports you to sun-kissed summer days. This all-natural scent is unforgettable. Everything Osea makes is clean, vegan, cruelty-free, and climate-neutral certified, so you never have to choose between your values and your best skin. Get healthy, glowing skin for summer with clean, vegan skincare from Osea. Get 10% off your first order site-wide with code GLOW at OseaMalibu.com. That's OSEAMalibu.com, code GLOW.